What's going on, Sports Nation? I'm your host, Kenneth Tiberius Clark, and you guys are listening to another fun episode of the Sportsclusive Podcast. So, looking back over the past 20 years, we have gotten the chance to watch the greatest athlete that the NBA has ever seen in LeBron James. Freak of nature. We watched him come into the league as this 18-year-old, bright-eyed, straight out of high school kid. We watched him come straight into the NBA at a high school, which was impressive. I think he was the last draft class to do it? Maybe Ray was the one after. I don't know. But we watched him grow from that to a basketball genius, to a very successful and world-renowned businessman. More importantly, we watched him grow into a family man, a husband, a father. We watched him lose his first NBA Finals in 2007, where he got smacked around by the Spurs, right? Humbling experience for him. And then fast forward 13 years, we watched him win his fourth championship when the Lakers beat the Miami Heat in the Mickey Mouse bubble. So, like the Kobe Bryants, like the Michael Jordans, like the Magic Johnsons before him, we were privileged to see his story play out, right? And I think that that's been one of the most underrated aspects of the NBA experience. Their consistent ability to provide us as fans with a hero, with a protagonist of sorts, somebody to root for, somebody that maybe we see the game through their eyes just a little bit. Now, that being said, for the first time, I can't tell you who the hell that person is going to be moving forward. And that leads to what the question is for today for you guys. Who will be the next face of the NBA? We've seen them try to push certain guys on us, like a Zion Williamson, a John Morant, both horrible PR teams. If you don't know, do your research. I remember there was a time where the league was putting a lot of sting behind Anthony Davis as the next, de facto guy. The guy that was going to take the torch from LeBron James and run with it and be the face of the league. But it never materialized because of injuries, and then you have people questioning his toughness and questioning his love for the game. So that just never came to fruition. And then we did have Steph. He's still around. We had Steph kind of be, we seen what him and the Warriors did for the better part of 10 years. There was a time where it was either a LeBron James-led team or the Warriors. So that was basketball for, like I said, a good 10-year period. But to me, it always felt like Steph he was like a joker to LeBron James's Batman. He was an obstacle. He was adversity that LeBron needed to get over to win. Which he did. He won that chip, came back from 3-1 deficit in the series, came back and won it. That was 2017. So I just never saw Steph as that guy, but his brand was really, really big, and he's impacted basketball a lot substantially. People are talking about him as the best point guard of all time. So, I guess the biggest thing that we would have to explore is what wickets does a player need to hit to fill that role, to be embraced by fans in the league alike. So I came up with three different wickets, right? And I think they're pretty spot on. You guys can tell me what you think. So one is obvious. You have to be an exceptional talent, right? You can't be average or good. You got to be exceptional, if not head and shoulders better than your contemporaries. Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, they had long stretches of time where they were the single best players in the NBA. It wasn't arguable. And then, like I said earlier, it's not enough to just be very good. Like, you can't be a Jimmy Butler or a Tony Parker-esque type of player and headline the league. Good players, right? Not bad by any means. So I don't want you guys to think that I'm disrespecting these. I know some Tony Parker fans, so don't show up at my place with torches and pitchforks. But you have to be the absolute best of the best to headline a league. Two, and this is the most important one, you have to have an interesting story, right? Something that the league can build a narrative around. And, you look at when LeBron came in, everybody was behind his rag to riches story. He came from humble beginnings. He grew up in Ohio. He grew up in the hood. Single parent household, it was just his mom, from my understanding. And people really got behind that. And we've seen what he's grown into, a family man and, businessman. Outside of his success in the NBA, he's really had a successful life despite coming from where he came from. So the NBA was able to build a narrative around that easy. And then if we go further back, right, let's go back to the late 70s, 80s, right? And you guys will remember this one, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, the two co-headliners that saved the NBA. I think basketball, not just the NBA, but the basketball community as a whole did a really good job of building a narrative around these two great players who were polar opposites. Larry Bird they're both Midwestern guys. Larry Bird was from French Lick, which from my understanding is like in the middle of fucking nowhere. And it's like a population of 1 to 2,000. Magic Johnson's from Lansing, Michigan, right? Obviously bigger of a location, more well-known. Larry Bird came from not the greatest family environment. And then he grew up in poverty. Magic Johnson came from a decent family environment, lower middle class. Both his parents had decent jobs. So they're so different. Larry Bird, stoic, reserved, not very interesting, right? Not a people person. Magic Johnson, and for anybody that's watching Wintertime, you learn a little bit more about him. He's very colorful. He's very charismatic, very charming. People loved him. So these were the two players that basketball had at that time. And then obviously the rivalry really took off when they played each other in that national championship. Was it Michigan State versus Indiana State? And then obviously Magic Johnson and Michigan State won. So, and then it followed them into the league. And this is the genius part to me. Even though, we know times have changed and we've made a lot of progression when it comes to matters of race, but especially during that time frame, they really played on the racial aspect between these two players and their teams. Larry Bird went to the Boston Celtics, which we all know that fan base, what Boston is like, but that fan base is predominantly white. And then obviously a lot of players on the team were white. Magic Johnson went to LA and the Lakers, which we all know was a much more diverse fan base and environment. And the Lakers were flashy and, colorful and fun. So once again, just so different, but the NBA played on that. And really that's what it set the foundation, not only for the 80s, but, what the NBA became. And then you just kind of watch everything fall in place on top of this one narrative. You saw Michael Jordan, his airness come into the league in the mid 80s, and he was the generational talent that just couldn't win because the Bulls fucking sucked. And then you had the bad boy Pistons, who was the perfect villain. Like, I don't even think the NBA expected them, because nobody on that team is really marketable. Love Isaiah Thomas, but nobody in there is really like a super marketable person. But they come into the league and they just throw a monkey wrench into everything. They're just beating everybody up. They're beating the Bulls up. They're beating the Celtics up, beating the Lakers up. So that was the villain that they needed. But just long story short, the NBA loves narratives. They love a good story. And you need to have that in order to headline or be the face of a league. 3, you have to be marketable, right? This is one you just can't get around. People have to love you. Kids have to want to be like you. Companies have to envision you representing their brand. Early 90s, everybody remembers Gatorade had that wildly successful I Want to Be Like Mike campaign, right? Did really well, right? That's a perfect example. They got to see you representing their brand. And here's another crazy aspect, or another crazy wicket you need to hit. You got to have sex appeal. We all know women are amongst the biggest consumers, or they're the biggest consumers in this country. I literally know women who don't enjoy the sport, but they watch basketball because they find a certain NBA player attractive. Don't care about the game, but this guy is hot, so I'm going to watch it. So that is just the reality. You can't get around that. But then that's one end. I've seen the other end when a player is exceptional, but they're just not marketable. Tim Duncan is probably the best example. Best power forward of all time, wildly successful, won championships. But his personality is very dry. His play style was very unexciting, uninspiring, efficient, but just unexciting. So he just never really built that big of an individual fan base. Unless you're a basketball purist, you didn't appreciate Tim Duncan for what he was as a player. I remember growing up as a kid, running around, people naming out their favorite NBA players. Oh, it's Kobe. Oh, it's LeBron. Oh, it's KG. Oh, it's Dirk. I've never heard anybody say Tim Duncan because he just wasn't fun to watch. So that's Tim Duncan. If we go modern right now, we're in an NBA where Nikola Jokic is the best player in the NBA. Like, that's not arguable. But because it doesn't look how people want it to look, that's why he just doesn't kind of get that type of publicity. He's not athletic at all. My buddy Ira says this all the time. He says he can't jump over a phone book. Very unathletic, but his game is built on fundamentals. He has mastered the fundamentals. So people get frustrated seeing their favorite freakishly athletic power forward or center get put in a blender by this guy, this European, this overseas guy who isn't fun, right? Isn't exciting, isn't athletic. I've literally sat and watched people. I've watched people as they're watching Nikola Jokic play, specifically in the Black community. I'm gonna be transparent about this. They've watched him and they're like, they screw their face up and they're like, why the fuck is he good? It just pisses them off that this guy who's just so unexciting, unathletic is this great. So you have to be marketable. Nikola Jokic, I don't even think he has his own shoe. I don't see him in commercials like that. You don't hear about him at social events, social functions with other athletes or NBA players. That's just not who he is. So in the grand scheme of things, you can be an exceptional player, but marketability and mass appeal, that stuff matters. If you don't have that, unfortunately, you're probably not going to headline a league. So long story short, right? If a player doesn't encompass all of these three things, they probably won't be the guy that the NBA would choose to represent them. And then I have to say this quick sidebar note, because I just mentioned Nikola Jokic. Separate conversation, but it's related. The NBA right now has a humongous overseas problem, like a big one. And not in the way that you would think, like, oh, they're not getting enough overseas players. No, they're getting enough. But for the first time in league history, you can honestly say this, right? True to your heart, no lies being told, that the top 3 or 4 players in the NBA right now are all overseas players, right? Jokic, Giannis, Luka, Embiid, right? 5 is arguable. Maybe it's a Kevin Durant one day or a Steph Curry the next day, right? It's a toss-up. It depends on what day of the week it is. But the top 3 or 4 players are overseas players. And I want you to really think about this, especially with the recent no allow comments that people hated him for. America has it's always prided itself on being the best basketball nation in the world. And now they're no longer even the best in their own league. And even if we go back to the conversation at hand, talking about who will be the face of the NBA, you guys, there's not very many encouraging young American prospects that fit the bill. Like, oh, okay, this guy's going to represent my league, or he's going to be the face of my league. I mean, maybe we go with Ja Morant. Well, Ja Morant has a story you can get behind. Obviously he comes from a decent family. He's really close to his father. But Ja Morant wasn't highly recruited coming out of high school. He really had to get it out the mud in that sense, right? Came from a good family, so he wasn't poor or anything. But wasn't highly recruited. And even when he got to Murray State, he wasn't like he was a one and done guy. Like, he played 2 or 3 years at Murray State, and he had to get them to the tournament for people to get an understanding of how good he was as a player. So, and he is charismatic. He is fun. He is marketable. Women do love him. So maybe Ja Morant, but obviously he has the off the court issues, flashing guns and this, that, and the third, and some of his surroundings. So he would have to clean that up and kind of really rebuild his brand to be embraced in that way. That's a tall order, so I don't know if that can happen. You got Jayson Tatum, great talent. And there are days where I'm like, man, there are some days where I'm like, Jayson Tatum's the best player in the NBA. Some days, right? He'll have those moments, but that's just him on the court. He is not interesting. Like, the only interesting thing I can tell you about Jayson Tatum is that he's dating Ellie Mae, who's fine as hell. That's probably the most interesting thing about Jayson Tatum. And then we got Zion Williamson, who a few years ago was the NBA's darling. He was their baby. They loved him. They were going to market the hell out of him. He was going to be their next guy. But he's had some off-the-court issues. I don't know, dealing with, adult film actresses and, but he's a little cheesy, a little quirky, kind of childish, kind of immature. Once again, you just don't really see somebody like Zion, especially as time is going by. Do you really see Zion representing the NBA? So I don't see that working out. And obviously he's had a rash of injuries anyway, so he hasn't even been on the court like that. So in the end, for me, I'll be honest, the most logical choice is the recently drafted Spurs drafted Victor Wembanyama. He truly hits all the wickets. He's a French-born player, so he's not from America. But he's been in the national spotlight since he was 15. So he's, considered a phenom. He's been playing professional ball already. Considered a phenom. I think they have a video somewhere of him putting Rudy Gobert in a blender. And this is him at like 15, 16 years old against a defensive player of the year, Rudy Gobert. And he was embarrassing a grown man. So that's just how good Victor Wembanyama is. Comes from a family of athletes. His father ran track. His mother and his sister were both professional basketball players. He is perfect for today's modern NBA of what they want from a big. He's 7'4", but he plays like a wing, right? He can handle the ball. He has a nice little mid-range shot. He's developing a nice three ball. He can do everything. He can rebound, everything. He's just so perfect for what today's modern NBA is. And he's charismatic and he's fun. He's still coming into his own, obviously, because he, just got to America and he's here more. But he's really, really a fun, colorful young kid, and people like him. So I think the biggest question I have to leave you guys with is the NBA, or America more specifically, are they prepared to embrace an overseas player as the face of their league? And if not, then who? You guys let me know. See you guys next time.